There are paintings that depict dreams, and then there are paintings that feel as if they have escaped from the darkest region of sleep itself. The Nightmare, by Henry Fuseli, belongs to that second category. It is not a peaceful dream scene, not a poetic vision, not a gentle fantasy. It is a painting about the terrifying moment when the mind loses control, when the body lies helpless, and when something unknown seems to enter the room from the shadows. Few images in art history have captured the atmosphere of dread as powerfully as this one. It feels intimate, theatrical, irrational, and deeply unsettling all at once. At first glance, the image is unforgettable. A woman lies sprawled across a bed, her body bent backward in a pose that suggests total vulnerability. Her white dress spills over the side of the mattress. Her arms hang lifelessly. Her head falls back, exposing her throat in a posture that feels both dramatic and disturbingly defenseless. On top of the chest sits a small demonic creature, an incubus, staring directly outward with bright and watchful eyes. Behind a curtain, emerging from darkness, the head of a horse thrusts into the room with a wild, ghostly intensity. The composition is bizarre, yet strangely precise. Every element seems designed to make the viewer feel trapped inside an image, where sleep has become invasion. That is one of the reasons The Nightmare remains so compelling. It does not simply show fear. It shows fear entering a private space where fear should not be. A bedroom is normally a place of rest, privacy, surrender, and intimacy. Fuseli transforms that room into a stage 4 psychic violation. The sleeping woman cannot defend herself. She cannot even fully know what is happening. The incubus sits with cruel calm upon her body, while the horse appears like an impossible visitor from the unconscious. The result is a painting in which the most familiar of human experiences, sleep, becomes something haunted. To understand why this painting had such an impact, we need to begin with Henry Fuseli himself. Fuseli was a Swiss-born artist who became one of the most distinctive figures in late 18th century British art. He was fascinated by literature, mythology, imagination, dreams, and the dramatic extremes of the human mind. Unlike painters, who focused mainly on realistic everyday life or harmonious classical beauty, Fuseli was drawn toward the irrational, the supernatural, and the emotionally intense. His world was full of ghosts, passions, visions, and strange theatrical energies. In that sense, The Nightmare was not an isolated experiment. It emerged from an artist deeply interested in what happens when reason loosens its grip, and that makes the painting especially important. It appears at a moment when European culture was beginning to show a renewed fascination with emotion, sublimity, darkness, and the hidden regions of the self. The age of neat rational confidence was being challenged by a growing awareness that the human mind contains forces that cannot be organized into calm order. Desire, dread, fantasy, obsession, and terror all demanded artistic form. Fuseli answered that demand with one of the most iconic images of psychological disturbance ever painted. The title itself is already rich with meaning. Today, the word nightmare usually refers to a frightening dream, but historically, the term also carried associations with oppressive nocturnal spirits believed to sit on the chest of sleepers and cause terror, suffocation, or distress. Fuseli plays brilliantly with that old meaning. The incubus on the woman's chest literalizes the sensation of oppressive sleep. The painting does not merely represent a bad dream. It represents the ancient fear that sleep is a vulnerable state in which unseen forces can press themselves onto the body and mind. This is where the image becomes more than strange fantasy. It begins to connect with actual human experience. Many people know the terrifying sensation of waking in fear, unable to move, half trapped between dream and consciousness, feeling as though something is present in the room. Long before modern explanations of sleep paralysis, such experiences were often interpreted as supernatural visitations. The nightmare gives visual form to that sensation with extraordinary precision. The pressure on the chest, the sense of intrusion, the helplessness, the confusion between dream and reality, all of it is there. This is one reason the painting still feels so immediate. It touches a fear rooted not only in folklore, but in the body itself. The woman's pose is crucial to this effect. She does not appear peacefully asleep. She appears overcome. Her body is theatrically exposed, but also disturbingly inert. The curve of her form creates a sense of surrender that is not chosen. She seems to have collapsed into unconsciousness, while something unnatural claims the space around. Fuseli understands that vulnerability becomes most disturbing when it is visible. The sleeper does not know she is being watched, but the viewer does. That gap in awareness makes the scene even more uncomfortable. We stand outside the bedchamber, seeing what the sleeper cannot. The incubus is equally important. It is small in scale compared with the woman, yet emotionally enormous. Its compact body and fixed stare make it one of the most unnerving creatures in Western painting. It does not look frenzied. It looks deliberate. It sits there as if it belongs. That calmness is more frightening than violence would have been. The creature seems less like an attacker in motion and more like a presence already established. It has settled onto the sleeping body with possessive certainty, and because it looks directly outward, it implicates the viewer in the scene. It knows it is being seen. Then there is the horse. Few details in art history are stranger or more unforgettable than that head emerging from behind the curtain. The horse does not belong logically to the bedroom, and that is exactly why it is so effective. Dreams often work by allowing unrelated things to invade one another without explanation. The horse becomes the logic of nightmare itself, irrational, abrupt, and visually shocking. Its eyes are wide, its mouth open, its presence almost spectral. It pushes into the room from darkness, like a form that has crossed over from another mental realm. Some viewers have connected it to wordplay around the term nightmare, while others see it as a symbol of wild unconscious energy. Whatever the interpretation, its effect is unmistakable. It turns the scene from eerie to unforgettable. One of the most brilliant aspects of the nightmare is the contrast between sensuality and terror. The woman's body is painted with softness and dramatic elegance. The bed, the drapery, the exposed skin, all of these details carry a strong erotic charge. But that eroticism is inseparable from dread. Desire and fear become entangled. The painting suggests that what attracts can also threaten, that sleep can resemble surrender, and that intimacy can become invasion. This tension is one reason the painting became so famous. It did not simply frighten viewers. It disturbed them in a more complicated way by mixing beauty, vulnerability, and horror into a single image. That complexity also helps explain why the painting has often been discussed in relation to desire, repression, and the hidden life of the mind. Long before modern psychology gave systematic language to dreams and unconscious fears, Fuseli was painting a world in which the sleeping body becomes a stage for invisible pressures. The incubus may be supernatural, but it also feels psychological. The room may contain a demon, but it also feels like the inside of a troubled mind. The image stands at the boundary between folklore and inner experience, and that is exactly where its power begins. What makes the nightmare even more remarkable is that it does not offer explanation or comfort. We do not know exactly why this woman is visited. We do not know whether the scene is a dream, a haunting, or a symbolic revelation of hidden emotion. Fuseli leaves the viewer in uncertainty, and that uncertainty is essential. Nightmares are terrifying, not only because of what they show, but because of how little stable meaning they offer while they are happening. The painting preserves that sensation. It gives us the exact atmosphere of dread without fully solving it. That is why the nightmare remains one of the most haunting paintings ever created. It transforms sleep into vulnerability, desire into unease, and fantasy into oppression. It does not merely show a dream. It shows the terrifying possibility that the mind, once surrendered to darkness, may become a place where something else awakens. What makes the nightmare so extraordinary is not only its disturbing imagery, but the way Fuseli constructs an atmosphere in which the impossible feels emotionally true. The painting is irrational in its details, yet exact in its effect. A sleeping woman, a crouching incubus, and a horse emerging from a curtain should feel absurd when listed plainly, but inside the painting they become completely convincing. That is one of Fuseli's greatest achievement. He does not ask the viewer to believe in the literal reality of the scene. He asks the viewer to recognize the reality of fear that the scene expresses. That fear is rooted first in helplessness. Sleep is one of the few states in which every human being willingly surrenders control. The body becomes still. The mind loosens its hold on order, and the boundaries between thought, sensation, memory, and fantasy become unstable. The nightmare turns that ordinary surrender into a crisis. The woman's body is completely open to the viewer and completely unavailable to itself. She cannot protect her own space. She cannot push away the creature on her chest. She cannot stop the impossible from entering the room. The terror of the painting begins there. in the idea that the self is present but inaccessible. This is why the incubus matters so much. It is not large, but it is crushing in another way. It sits exactly where breath and panic meet. The chest is one of the most psychologically charged places in the body because it is tied to breath, heartbeat, pressure, and the sensation of life itself. To place a creature there is, to turn anxiety into image. The incubus becomes both a demon and a symptom. It embodies the old folklore of supernatural oppression, but it also feels like the physical sensation of nightmare given a face. Fuseli understands that what frightens people most is often not a visible monster alone, but the feeling that something invisible has weight. The creature's expression deepens that fear. It does not look wild or confused. It looks alert, almost intelligent in a cold and watchful way. Its eyes meet the viewer directly, as if it has stepped outside the woman's dream and into our own awareness. This direct gaze is one of the painting's most brilliant and disturbing decisions. Many terrifying images trap the victim alone with the threat. Fuseli does something worse. He makes the viewer acknowledge the threat as well. We are not only observers of the woman's nightmare, we are being looked at by it. The horse intensifies this effect by embodying the logic of dreams themselves. In waking life, it does not belong in the room. In nightmare logic, it belongs perfectly. It comes from the darkness behind the curtain like a thought the mind cannot stop once it appears. There is something deeply uncanny about the way it enters. It does not gallop in with violent action. It intrudes. It peers. It breaches the private space of the bedchamber with an energy that feels half comic, half terrifying, and entirely unforgettable. That strange balance is important. Nightmares are often frightening, precisely because they combine absurdity and menace without separating them. Fuseli's use of light strengthens the emotional structure of the painting. The woman's pale body and flowing fabric are illuminated with dramatic clarity, while the surrounding space remains shadowed and uncertain. This contrast does more than guide the eye. It creates a moral and psychological division. The sleeper is exposed. The forces around her emerge from darkness. Light here does not protect. It reveals vulnerability. The body becomes almost stage-like, displayed before the view, while the incubus and the horse seem to belong to a realm just beyond ordinary visibility. The room itself feels split between the known and the unknown. This split is one reason the painting has so often been discussed in relation to desire. The sleeper's body is undeniably sensual in its presentation. The exposed throat, the flowing dress, the curve of the torso, the abandon of the pose. All of these details carry an erotic charge. Yet that charge is inseparable from danger. The painting suggests not comfortable desire, but desire entangled with fear, repression, voyeurism, and loss of control. Fuseli does not separate the beautiful from the frightening. He binds them together so tightly that one becomes the vehicle of the other. That is why the image remains so psychologically rich. It is never just about terror. It is about the ways terror and desire can inhabit the same symbolic space. This complexity helps explain why the painting fascinated viewers in its own time and has continued to fascinate them ever since. It stands at an important threshold in cultural history. Earlier traditions had long used demons, dreams, and supernatural visitations as explanatory frameworks for nocturnal fear. Later psychology would search for inner meanings in dreams, anxieties, and repressed desires. The nightmare sits powerfully between these worlds. It can be read as folklore made visible. It can be read as a psychological image, before psychology had the language to fully name itself. That in-between quality gives the painting unusual depth. It is archaic and modern at the same time. The room itself contributes to this feeling. Bedrooms are supposed to be among the most private spaces in human life. They are places of sleep, vulnerability, intimacy, illness, birth, and death. By staging the nightmare there, Fuseli makes the scene uncomfortably personal. The threat is not out in a storm, a battlefield, or a forest. It is at the bedside. It arrives where defenses are lowest and privacy should be greatest. This makes the painting more than a fantasy. It becomes an image of violation at the threshold of the self. Another reason the painting remains so memorable is that it refuses narrative closure. We do not know what happens next. Does the woman awaken? Does the incubus vanish? Is the horse part of the same vision or a separate force? Is the scene supernatural, symbolic, erotic, comic, or tragic? Fuseli offers no final answer, and that is part of the genius of the work. A nightmare loses much of its power when fully explained. Its terror lies partly in its resistance to stable meaning. The painting preserves that resistance. It keeps the viewer inside a state of unresolved dread. This unresolved quality also makes the work feel deeply modern. So much of modern art and literature would become fascinated by fragmented consciousness, unstable identities, irrational fear, and the hidden life of the mind. Fuseli anticipates much of that. He paints not an event that can be rationally accounted for, but a state of being overwhelmed from within. The incubus may be a demon, but it can also be read as dread itself. The horse may be a supernatural intruder, but it can also be read as the absurd and uncontrollable logic of dream imagery. The room may be a bedroom, but it also feels like the interior theater of the mind. That is why the nightmare continues to resonate far beyond its original cultural setting. People still know what it means to wake with panic, to feel their body become strange, to feel that the mind can generate images more frightening than the outer world. People still know the unsettling overlap of attraction and fear, intimacy and invasion, beauty and menace. Fuseli gives all of that a visual form, so precise that the image seems impossible to forget. Once seen in Tatsanse, the nightmare is much more than a strange Gothic painting. It is a profound image of vulnerability, dream logic, and the hidden pressures of the unconscious. It does not simply show us a frightening scene. It shows us what fear feels like when reason is asleep and the darkest part of imagination begins to watch from the edge of the bed. The lasting power of the nightmare comes from the fact that it never remains only a strange image from the 18th century. It belongs to its own era, with its fascination for the Gothic, the supernatural, and the sublime. But it also reaches far beyond that world. The painting continues to disturb viewers because it captures something permanent about human vulnerability. It understands that fear does not always come from what is openly seen in daylight. Sometimes it comes from what arrives when consciousness loosens, when the body is still, and when the mind becomes a space where reason no longer rules completely. That is why the painting still feels so alive. It does not describe an outdated superstition. It reveals an ongoing human experience. One reason the image remains so unforgettable is that it blurs the line between external threat and internal terror. Are we meant to see an actual demon sitting on the woman's chest? Is the horse a supernatural intruder? Or are these things visual forms given to psychological pressure, repressed desire, panic, and dream logic? Fuseli never forces a final answer, and that is exactly what gives the work its depth. A purely supernatural explanation would make the image a ghost story. A purely psychological explanation would make it too neat. Fuseli keeps the painting suspended between both possibilities, allowing the viewer to feel the terror without fully containing it. In that unresolved space, the image becomes much more powerful. This tension between outer and inner reality is one of the reasons the painting has often been described as prophetic, long before modern psychology developed a systematic language for dreams. Unconscious impulses, repression, and the hidden life of the mind. Fuseli painted an image that seems to arise directly from those territories. The incubus can easily be read as more than a demon. It can be understood as anxiety, sexual dread, nocturnal oppression, or the concentrated form of thoughts that become unbearable in sleep. The horse can be read as irrational intrusion, the sudden and absurd image that appears in dreams with total authority. In this way, the nightmare seems to anticipate a later world in which the mind itself becomes one of the great theaters of art. At the same time, the painting never loses the force of folklore. That is important, because fear rarely belongs to only one system of explanation. Human beings do not stop feeling ancient terrors simply because they gain modern language for them. Sleep paralysis, panic, erotic anxiety, intrusive thoughts, and supernatural dread can all overlap inside one experience. Fuseli captures that overlap perfectly. He creates an image where the old demon and the modern psyche seem to occupy the same room. That is one of the deepest reasons the work still fascinates. It speaks to multiple levels of human fear at once. The woman at the center of the painting also remains crucial to its afterlife. Her vulnerability is not incidental. It structures the entire emotional field of the image. She is beautiful, exposed, unconscious, and unavailable to herself. The painting therefore raises disturbing questions about spectatorship. We see her in a state of helplessness that she cannot see. The incubus sees her. The horse intrudes upon her. And we, the viewers, also stand as witnesses to this invasion. Fuseli quietly places us in a morally uneasy position. We are not only frightened for the woman, we are also implicated in the act of looking at her vulnerability. That tension gives the painting another layer of psychological complexity. This is one reason the work has continued to generate so many interpretations. Some have read it as an image of supernatural horror, others as an image of sexual fear and repression, others as an embodiment of dream paralysis, others as a theatrical manifesto of imagination liberated from reason. These readings are not mutually exclusive. In fact, the painting becomes more compelling because it can sustain them all. Fuseli created an image that is specific enough to be unforgettable and open enough to remain inexhaustible. That balance is rare, and it is one of the marks of a truly lasting work of art. The painting's influence has also been enormous. Its imagery entered visual culture far beyond the walls of galleries. It was reproduced, parodied, echoed, and transformed in later art, literature, theater, and horror imagery. This matters because it shows how deeply the painting touched something in the collective imagination. The dark bedroom, the helpless sleeper, the watchful creature, the eruption of impossible presence. These elements became part of a wider vocabulary of fear. Fuseli was not merely painting a nightmare, he was helping shape how later generations would imagine nightmare itself. That influence is tied directly to the painting's emotional honesty. The nightmare does not treat terror as distant spectacle. It treats terror as intimate. The fear here is not out on a battlefield or across a sublime mountain range. It is in the bedchamber, on the body, inside sleep. That intimacy is what makes the work so durable. Human beings may live in different centuries, believe different things, and explain dreams in different ways, but everyone understands the basic fear of helplessness in the dark. Everyone knows, at some level, what it means for safety to become uncertain in the very place meant for rest. Another reason the painting endures is that it stages a struggle between reason and imagination without reducing either side to simplicity. The Enlightenment celebrate irrational order, clarity, and the power of thought to understand the world. Fuseli does not reject those values directly, but he paints the territory where they fail to govern completely. He reminds the viewer that the mind is not only logical, it is also haunted by desires, fears, and images that do not submit to order. In that sense, the nightmare is more than a gothic fantasy. It is a challenge to any view of human nature that pretends reason alone is enough. And yet the painting is not merely a celebration of irrational chaos either. It is too precise, too composed, too formally controlled for that. Fuseli shapes the irrational with extraordinary intelligence. The woman's body, the incubus, the drapery, the horse, the darkness, all are arranged with deliberate force. This gives the work a fascinating duality. It is a painting about the loss of control, yet it is made with immense artistic control. That tension is part of what makes it so compelling. The artist masters the form of unmastered fear. This mastery allows the painting to hold beauty and horror together without dissolving either. The white fabric is elegant. The body is graceful in its collapse. The creature is grotesque, but unforgettable. The horse is absurd, yet majestic in its own spectral way. The result is not crude shock. It is refined disturbance. Fuseli creates an image that seduces the eye, even as it unsettles the mind. That combination gives the work its peculiar afterlife. It is frightening, but also aesthetically irresistible. People do not only recoil from it, they return to it. That is why The Nightmare remains one of the most haunting paintings ever made. Not simply because it shows a demon in a bedroom, not simply because it is strange, but because it gives visible form to something ancient, intimate, and psychologically permanent. It reveals how vulnerable the human mind becomes when consciousness loosens, how beauty and fear can merge, and how the imagination can turn the private room into a theater of oppression. Once seen, the image does not fade easily. The limp body remains. The stare of the incubus remains. The horse still pushes through the curtain. The room remains half shadow and half revelation. Fuseli created not just a painting, but a permanent icon of what it feels like when sleep stops being rest and becomes a place where dread takes shape. And that is the final achievement of The Nightmare. It turns one sleeping figure into a universal image of helplessness before the unseen. It shows that what terrifies human beings most is not always what attacks from outside, but what waits at the edge of consciousness, ready to appear the moment reason closes its eyes.